All right, I am here with Matthew Ehret on the Duran once again. Matthew, it is great to have you on. And before we get started talking about what will be a first for the Duran, but I feel it's going to be I know it's going to be a very interesting video. Before we get started discussing your documentary, where can people follow your work?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, Alex. And they can follow my work at CanadianPatriot.org or MatthewEhret.substack.com.
All right, I will have those links in the description box down below and as a pinned comment. So I just finished watching episode 4 of your documentary, The Hidden Hand, UFOs, which I found to be, to my surprise, because I find it interesting, the whole topic of UFOs, but it's not something that I read up on often. But I found it extremely interesting because I feel as if there is a lot of geopolitical tie-in, and it's very relevant to a lot of the things that are happening today in governments, especially the governments of the collective West. So I'm going to pass it off to you in wherever you want to begin. I will also have the link to the documentary in the description box down below. It is part 4 that you have just released. You've just released it, correct?
Very recently, yeah, a few months ago.
Okay, a few months ago, great.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody to check it out and to also see all the previous parts. But Matthew, I pass it over to you. So you can perhaps maybe add some context about this documentary, what compelled you to move forward with this, and we can move the show along.
Yeah, most certainly. Thank you, Alex, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's part of an ongoing series. I imagine that we're going to have about 8 episodes when we finally do justice, I think, to the topic, and it's something that I've done with my wife and our filmmaking collaborator, genius friend, Jason Dahl, who's been able to take a lot of our ideas, our research, and turn it into these multimedia documentaries we've been making. So I'm very proud of how this one turned out. And it wasn't something that I went into highly passionate about a couple of years ago when I began this research. But what caught my attention was in 2019, there were some anomalies that just simply bothered me, like the fact that the Congress was announcing that they were going to begin congressional investigations into UFO government collusion. David Grush was becoming a name increasingly as a whistleblower on the inside. There's another fellow by the name of Tom Luong, not Luong, the singer from Blink 182. I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden, but he became a sort of.
I know who you're talking about, though. Tom something. You keep on going, and I'll look.
I got it. DeLong, whatever. Tom DeLong. Yeah. And he all of a sudden was a very weird personality that I was just seeing curated and propped up in the social media space, in the podcasting space, and even in mainstream media. He was being brought in on official mainstream media platforms to be a voice promoting the UFO disclosure operation, but he wasn't alone. He had and this is 2019, right? I was doing this work. I wrote a little article for Strategic Culture Foundation, and he had created an agency, which I clearly saw very quickly by looking at their website and their history, that he was clearly a front man because of all of the advisors and co-creators of this agency called To the Stars Academy of the Arts and Sciences in 2016. And among the co-founders were people like Harold Putoff, a figure who was extremely high up in the U.S. Intelligence apparatus. He was a co-founder of Project Stargate back in 1973. Which was an offshoot of the the Stanford Research Institute's program, which I think was kind of a continuation when I look at its operating procedures, what it was doing as far as mind experiments on especially young people. It was a large operation that was tied to the CIA. So the fact that you have this guy, Harold Putoff, playing a role in co-founding this agency, and then when I listened to an interview of Tom DeLonge talking about how he got recruited into this, he literally talks about how, you have former leading figures within the CIA, within the deep state, the former Pentagon bioweapons, I forgot the name of the specific title, all a part of and serving as his advisors in this thing. And you could look at on their website, look at the bios of each of these personalities. And these are very high up creatures of Obama's deep state. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, this is clearly, there's another thing going on. Do they really care? Do all of these deep state operators really care that much? Christopher Mellon, right, was a big promoter and backer of this thing. Do they really care about truth? Is that really something that is a high priority for these agencies and for the deep state that's been around taking over our government, overseeing the murder of John F. Kennedy and turning the United States into an empire? Do they care about truth, really, about UFO government collusion, or is there some other agenda going on? So, of course, there's another agenda, and I composed my little article, which sort of created the baseline for a lot of my further research. One of the anomalies that I also picked up on in that 2019 article, which comes up a lot in episode 3 and episode 4, the one you just watched, is Lawrence Rockefeller, one of the most powerful patriarchs of the Rockefeller family, who passed away in 2004. But, he was one of the lesser known, but I would say one of the most influential of the 5 Rockefeller brothers, who are the grandsons of John D. Rockefeller Jr. And he's a fellow who was openly recognized as a hero in the UFO truth community because he was the founder of the Disclosure Project for the Clinton White House in 1991. He was a big backer of Bill Clinton. He was brought into the White House. There's pictures of him and Bill in the earliest days when Bill is just learning the ropes of Washington. There's pictures of him and Hillary Clinton where Hillary was being brought down to his resort compound in I think it's Wyoming, and he's the creator of the initiative that Bill Clinton celebrates by being the first president releasing classified information on UFO research and FBI interrogations of people who saw things in the sky. And millions of batches of files were released under Bill Clinton. Nothing really there per se, other than anecdotes galore. But that really put a lot of fuel onto the fire of the disclosure movement as a movement per se, especially at a time when the Soviet Union was not really serving its role as the organizing principle of the big threat to unite and organize the American population, right? It was the moment the Soviet Union's circuits were being pulled out from within. Again, not disconnected from Lawrence Rockefeller, who played a big role in funding not just the Esalen Stargate projects, because that a lot of the Esalen operations in California were being fused into the operating procedures of remote viewing, different ways that drugs can help open up astral projection and give superpowers to especially military initiates. This is what was largely brought into the military under the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, starring George Clooney. It's a John Ronson book that was turned into a movie a little while ago. That was a true story. Under John Alexander and other people around General Stubblebean, who was the head of military intelligence in 1980-81, who brought in these basically new age reforms into the military to create Jedi mind wars, people who could literally just focus their power of mind with the help of transcendental meditation and other things to blow up the heart of goats as practice for blowing up the hearts of your enemies on the battlefield with your mind, or to astral project to see where Osama bin Laden's lairs are hidden when you're in maybe Langley, Virginia, but you'll be able to know because of your training to see on the astral plane where Osama bin Laden's operations are in Afghanistan and use that information to carry out drone attacks halfway around the world. So all this stuff was actually brought in. It sounds crazy, but this was the spoonbenders, right? They were bringing in Uri Geller, who was serving as the role model of mind war operators during Stargate. He was being brought in as a role model to train many of these special forces operations under Stubblebean. And again, Putov was playing a role in that too. And others, Michael Aquino, the infamous satanic colonel who got his stripes carrying out Operation Phoenix in Vietnam, was also a big player in infusing the Mind Wars, PSYOPs to Mind Wars strategic manual, which I think became strategic policy, or tactical policy in the new U.S. military reforms of the 1980s that went on to create the vanguard of the new Jedi, warrior elites that oversaw things like Desert Storm and 9/11 and everything since then, I would say. So Lawrence Rockefeller, well, how does that tie into the collapse of the Soviet Union? Well, this guy was also bankrolling I forgot the name of it, but it was the American-Russian Friendship Association through Esalen. He was the principal bankroller of that. I think there was an article on The Atlantic from years ago talking very much about that. This is not a secret piece of information where people like Boris Yeltsin were brought in from Russia to go to Esalen and receive special secret training and whatever other experiences he was given. I can only imagine with other members of a certain faction within the Russian deep state apparatus that were then brought in to coordinate on the other side of the Iron Curtain a controlled demolition of the Soviet Union, and effectively some weird kind of kumbaya thing where even Gorbachev was sponsoring Esalen projects in Russia. Even though he was nominally a rival to Yeltsin, he was still sponsoring Esalen projects on the Russian side. So it seems like even there you have the hand of Lawrence Rockefeller doing that. But what else was he doing? This guy was sponsoring the weirdest things. He's known as the philosopher. That's how Stephen Greer, who also became the head of the spokesperson for the Disclosure Initiative, after Stephen Greer was brought to Lawrence Rockefeller's Wyoming ranch, the same ranch that Hillary Clinton was brought to, so too was Stephen Greer brought in 1993 before unveiling this Disclosure Initiative. So was Linda Moulton Howe was brought into this thing too. There's photographs of all of them together with Lawrence Rockefeller that we cite. But Greer talks about Lawrence Rockefeller as the philosopher amongst the Rockefellers. He's ready to criticize all of the Rockefeller, Nelson and David and all of that. They're bad. But Lawrence is the misunderstood philosopher of them all who gives great patronage to the truth tellers, amongst whom we could find, and I cite this in my original 2019 article, and it comes up in the videos, Terence McKenna, and Terence McKenna's Green Earth Foundation that did so much to popularize the revival of a fungus cult, a psychedelic mushroom cult of the ancient times that Terence McKenna was very committed to reviving as a new foundation for a post-Christian religion that would, in Terence McKenna's own mind, help us communicate with interdimensional aliens from the beyond, that he was quite convinced ancient mushroom psychedelic practitioners of ancient times were interfacing with when they got information on how do you build the pyramids, or how does, Jesus walk on water, or whatever, right? He had a whole creative mythos that he was very, very committed to, as far as the religious foundations that tie to aliens that these drugs, psilocybins, give us as a power to be more than human, to be to have superpowers, which is, I think, what all of these guys always seem to want at the end of the day, is to create superpowers that allow them to communicate with forces from the beyond, whatever those might be. And a lot of these things were developed by MK Ultra. So if you again, the drug thing, the UFOs are running governments around the world, and there's been secret government alien communications this whole time. That these two storylines have been parallel but interfacing, and I think they're two sides of the same thing coming into policy today as we speak. Because again, MK Ultra was the CIA overseen program that generated LSD-25, the entire spectrum of different types of psilocybins, DMT. All of this stuff didn't emerge organically from the counterculture movement that just wanted to experiment with alternative ways of thinking by themselves. These were all top-down programs that used human guinea pigs first in the military and then broadened it to students, to hospital patients at the Allen Memorial and other things, in thousands of projects and sub-projects overseen by people like Alan Dulles and people like Frank Wisner and Sidney Gottlieb, the guy who was also commissioned to finding different ways of overthrowing Castro and so many other leaders of governments that were not behaving the way they were supposed to. But this is the guy who was overseeing the Mind Wars program that was doing all sorts of things in Stanford, which was one of the big universities carrying out human guinea pig experiments in the 50s and the 60s on MK Ultra, as was Harvard, which is what gave us the gifts of things like Ted Kaczynski as the Unabomber, who was part of one of these the Harvard psilocybin project under Gottlieb and Henry Murray. Also, Aldous Huxley played a role in that project, as well as Ram Dass in overseeing that program on children, young people who were broken of their and liberated of their old morality, old identities through the help of these, de-patterning mind drugs and God knows whatever else they did to them, and then came out completely new, glazed over, eyeballed fanatics with strange obsessions to destroy industrial civilization and create his own cults, which is exactly what he did before he died. So you got this whole thing, which is top-down sponsored. Again, Carl Jung plays a role in the documentary series, as I take note that he was exposed even by leading scientists who were pissed off with him because they got wind that he was working to create a new UFO religion during the Cold War with the help of Carl Jung, who was an OSS agent in World War II and who continued to be his advisor, his psychological warfare advisor throughout the 1940s into the 50s, writing guiding messages to him, even being commissioned by Alan Dulles, where Carl Jung was commissioned to write this book that I have actually right here and that I used in the documentary, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, which is sort of a handbook for social engineers, giving people who are going to be in the levers of power influencing the shadows in the cave walls, how to use this new mythos of the saucer, what it represents as a substitute for God, a substitute for, the divine that could then be used for a new religion, a new governing mythos for the next generations of human beings. It really does read like a handbook. And Carl Jung, again, was not just sponsoring the UFO thing in that sense, or guiding the UFO thing, as was other people who got fired by John F. Kennedy, like Richard Bissell, who John F. Kennedy also fired, who was the head of Office of Policy Coordination, the basically psychological warfare division of the CIA, and basically the assassinations expert of the CIA, who founded Area 51 and who ran Area 51 all the way up until JFK fired Bissell, as well as Jung and Charles Cabell, Charles Cabell is the vice director of the CIA, who JFK did also fire for a variety of reasons, not just the Cuban, not just the botched, Bay of Pigs operation, though that was a big official reason. There were other aspects to it. But Charles Cabell also was the guy who officiated the creation of Project Blue Book, the official CIA program to observe alien contact that went on until 1969, started in 1952, and helped incubate a lot of the myths, including that of Roswell, including that of the dissected aliens that we've been keeping that somehow couldn't avoid crashing. They could develop technology so advanced that it could transcend light speed or bounce from another dimension into ours. So they were that advanced, but once they arrived here, they just kept on crashing in deserts around U.S. military bases. And you're like, come on, but they built on that, right? And they built on the mystique that created in movies and in shows and books and things like that started on the fringe, that tickled the imagination of people on the fringe. But everything on the fringe, one generation, if you look like you leap ahead to the next generation, it often becomes mainstream, especially if it's being groomed and curated from very powerful forces who are thinking multi-generationally, as those who I just mentioned are. Which brings us to the current situation today, where it seems like, you have Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day that's happening on Thursday. And Steven Spielberg is celebrating how Christians are going to have to completely rethink their religion. And this is not fiction in Spielberg's mind. And Spielberg was a guy who was brought into this operation early on as one of the first promulgators or promoters of this new way of thinking with his film Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1978. Yeah. So
E.T. as well.
E.T. as well. That was Steven Spielberg. That's right. Yeah. And Close Encounters was actually, he had as his advisor the guy who coined the term Close Encounters of the Third Kind and created the categorization system that has been used even in universities and what have you for scientific language for UFO investigations, was J. Allen Hynek, who even played a role in his film, gave J. Allen Hynek a role to play. and Hynek was the guy who was the primary overseer of every single government UFO investigation, from Project Sign, Project Grudge in the 40s, to the Robertson panel on UFO phenomenon in 1950. He was the overseer of Project Blue Book. He was the overseer in 1974 to 1978 of the National Enquirer's Blue Ribbon Committee, co-sponsored by the NISAP, the National Investigation. NISAP was it was basically a citizens investigation of the UFO phenomenon, aerial phenomenon committee that was created by the CIA. Its first president was Richard Hillenkoetter. Hillenkoetter was the first director of the CIA who founded this thing. It was staffed by spooks from the top down. There was entire the board of directors, Brian III, Brian III, who was one of the top officials at the Office of Policy Coordination and sponsor of the first meetings that created Project Artichoke and Project MK Ultra, was also a very enthusiastic board member of this National Citizens Inquiry on Aerial Phenomenon Commission that then took over the reins of the CIA with the National Enquirer's Project Blue Book. That basically took it to the next level. And Hynek was always there. He was always overseeing these different committees, and he was the guy who started as the big critic. That was his claim to fame. Is he was like he's the guy who came up with the scientific swamp gas explanation that people aren't seeing anything anomalous. They're seeing swamp gas. Now, that was an unscientific, lazy response that he did as the big official critic of the UFO believers up until 1965. When he just has this weird Saul to Paul on the road of Damascus conversion. And he's like all of a sudden the loudest, most enthusiastic, evangelizing UFO promoter. And what gave him the credibility is that he played such a big role for so many years, managing these different things and being the critic, the constant materialistic critic. And then all of a sudden with his shift, he became seen as like that was like the big authority. You're supposed to go along with him. If you were critical, if you had doubts, you were supposed to leave those behind, just like he had the courage to do and become a believer just like him, which actually made him quite the celebrity in the UFO truth community. And he advised Spielberg, as did Jacques Vallée, who also worked with Tom DeLonge on the creation and management of the To the Stars Academy, and also on Project Stargate earlier. That same Jacques Vallée, who's very, very active in the truth community today on the UFO subject, was brought in, as well as he was given an actual part. There was a French scientist in Spielberg's movie, on the Close Encounters movie, and that was an homage directly to Jacques Vallée. But then Jacques Vallée and Hynek were both also giving simultaneously testimony and speeches at the United Nations. People can Google and see pictures of both of them at the UN, calling for, and you could read their speeches, the transcripts are available, calling for one world government to manage all of the UFO anomalous data internationally in a singular control mechanism. So helping to effectively accelerate the transcendence of the nation state system that's outdated to something that allows for a top-down management under this idea of an alien threat. Is it something to unite the world around a threat? Is it something that's here to save us? Let's get more data. Let's get more feedback loops. And he's also a promoter of cybernetics in that sense, as a co-founder of working for DARPANET, of the modern internet. He's also a co-founder of the thesis that the aliens aren't extraterrestrial so much as they are interdimensional. So he's the one who develops and coins that term in 1969, sponsored by Hynek, of interdimensional aliens that might also be demons, that might also be all of the pixies and gnomes and other things that were like, stealing children in the forests of Bohemia that we didn't have a language for, and we called them whatever, fairies, evil fairies or witches. But he's like, no, these are actually interdimensional aliens. They didn't have a word for that, but that's why they operate and do like occult black magic type of rituals on people who get abducted, and talk about how they were sexually molested or tortured by a lot of these UFO experiences. And that's the reason why it's the same black magic that was happening by witch covens on people or other kinds of, demon forces, that these were always the demons. So he paints a picture of a very nefarious kind of image of these dark forces. But then they build on that. And so in my documentaries, and I've been spewing it out for a while now, and I'll throw the ball back at you. What I'm trying to do is just shed light on, like, who's orchestrating this, basically, and why.
Right. Well, the interesting part about your documentary is that it goes back to, it ties in a lot of CIA programs. It focuses quite a bit on JFK and what he was working to expose, and it brings me to where we are today, where we see a type of a resurgence in interest in the whole UFO phenomenon, ushered in by Trump. While at the same time, we have the interest in JFK as well, and what happened with the assassination of JFK through the release of the documents, once again initiated by Trump. And of course, you have the geopolitical changes that we've been documenting, both of us, in our reporting and in our various videos and programs, which is a big shift for the way the world works. The message that I got from watching your documentary is that much of the UFO narrative is rooted in this one world globalist type of governance, even though all of it seems to be very US focused. The UFO phenomenon, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, definitely is US or North American centric. I don't see a lot of countries outside of the US or the North America, the hemisphere, actually focusing so much on UFOs or documenting UFOs. But all of a sudden, you have a shift from globalism, unipolar world, to a different structure, the multipolar world, let's say, or some sort of block power sharing, which is happening. But you have the UFO narrative, which definitely feels like it is about holding the position of the globalist, or furthering along the globalist control of the world. Is that a correct assessment? Am I looking at this right? I mean, is that why, could that be the reason why we see, especially the Trump administration, really now pushing the whole UFO thing? We see so much interest now in UFOs. We see interest in what was happening with JFK and the release of these documents. I mean, this is not coincidence, is it?
No, no, it's not coincidence. No, and I share your hypothesis, and I'm operating on. I've come to increasingly take on a similar idea about the motive, and I don't like using the word multipolar as a one blanket thing, because as you guys know, and your audience knows this, there's a battle of
for simplicity. I mean,
for simplicity, yeah, like
to keep it simple, to keep it simple, yeah.
And one of the ideas that I think those social engineers trying to manage this new system, this new paradigm being brought online, that they've had in mind is this concept that we will require a new set of beliefs that will replace and supersede the outdated old beliefs of Christianity and the conventional norms of morality that had animated society under the age of Pisces, as we're now entering this new age of Aquarius, or the age of Horus, as Crowley called it, the age of the child, the sacred ignorance of a child that has this beautiful ignorance, this sacred superstition that has to be the dominant sort of feeling of the new age that will be brought online. But that, this new superstition, this new holy superstition, or this dark enlightenment, as some, I think, coin it. Okay, you froze there for a second. It has to be tied to new mythologies that are going to satisfy our imagination, our need to have the transcendent met, the feeling of the transcendent that we all need as a yearning inside of our soul, because our souls are, after all, more than the body. They are divine, but that you can abuse that and give it a misdirection as well if you're a sorcerer with a little bit too much political power, of course. And I think one of the things that tie in the story a lot in every way I look at it, whether it's the drug aspect, whether it's the control over the dissolution of the Soviet Union in that particular way that it happened, or the current name that Trump gave this major project that it was being revived as soon as he got elected, which was Project Stargate, as I think an homage to the thing that endured all the way up until the 1990s, from 1973 until the 90s. It didn't
can't be a coincidence.
I don't think it's a coincidence in name, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the remote viewing operations that were a continuation of MK Ultra that were continued on into the 80s, that had a lot of cults. It also incorporated a lot of cults like the Edgar Cayce cult that donated a lot of their children. I've spoken to a few of them to become human guinea pigs, to become basically mind warriors, but that involved a lot of trauma-based mind control too. It gets a bit disturbing to hear what some of these people had to go through under this Stargate thing, whatever the hell that was, but then created also stories, again, that colored our collective dream, our imagination in the form of Hollywood movies like Stargate, which itself was entirely informed by the anecdotal testimonials of actual people who had been through the Stargate. I would even call it a magic trick, because I think it worked with a lot of hoaxing and a lot of control of outcomes, and people who were always in on it, who are playing into, I think, this really is stage magic, but expanded over a longer term, so that it fed back in and created feedback loops for Hollywood creative writers, often funded by the CIA, to then generate storylines that would then be promoted into our films, right? And again, color our idea predictively of what the future was going to be, what is on other planets, what is in the past. Maybe the past is the future, because the advanced technologies of the Egyptians were actually given by Stargate, intercivilizational demon aliens, gray alien demon shapeshifters, which is part of the movie Stargate at the very end, which gave the pharaohs the power and the technology to build those pyramids, which actually exist on other star systems within our galaxy. So it creates like a space opera, a big space for the mind to create new sub-stories and stories within stories with a lot of place. So the fact that Trump called it that as part of the much broader, or the other aspect was the Oracle AI was brought in as part of Project Stargate, but then a lot of the abusive, like, fintech operations. If you look at a lot of the like peer-to-peer fintech scams that helped drive the economic crisis, even what Goldman Sachs was a part of, but a lot of the biggest disruptive forces that were part of destabilizing the current economic architecture, and have been penetrated into China. Things like Alibaba, Ant Group, Tencent, that these are not authentically, my wife is writing a big report, we're going to make this a documentary very shortly. These don't come out of China. They are put into China from operators who are tied to Stanford and to the Stargate funding mechanisms, like SoftBank, which is a Japanese bank that's a major funder of Stargate, and OpenAI. And a lot of this is organized around the same Stanford area. Peter Thiel was groomed, as was Elon Musk, out of the Stanford operation. Again, the big MK Ultra operation that was part. So I always have to restate that. But that's what was sort of the incubator that then generated, for whatever experiences that these people were given while they were there. I'm not even too sure what it is structurally, but they came out of that with this insight to be the creators of this new alternative digital economy that would have this quality about it of allowing, billionaires who could run social media apparatuses like Facebook to then emit their own currencies and do direct, basically act like banks, kind of like what Jack Ma was trying to do when he called for a banking coup d'etat in China in 2020. It's basically what he's trying to do.
What X is also trying to do. I mean, Elon Musk has said that he would like X to very much be like Alipay, Alibaba, yeah.
Yeah, and WeChat, which again, when you look at an everything app, right, where again they could create social credit scores. That's part of what Palantir is also already doing with their predictive crime operations that are active in the police departments across many U.S. states, including Canadian states too, where they've got AI working to map out people's behavior, what are there financial transactions, bank records, websites they go to, and give them grades based on that can be translated into predictive crime models that could then preemptively be used to act against somebody before they commit a crime, as is how a lot of these software systems are promoted. And these are being integrated across Europe too. It's not just the United States. It's not just in Canada, but we've seen also integration with the UK, where again, there's like the surface appearance of a World Wrestling Federation combat between Trump and Keir Starmer that's being sold as, they're enemies, they hate each other. And maybe that's true as personalities, possibly. But on a deeper structural level, there's the biggest integration that I've seen with a 1.5 billion pound deal given by the UK government to Palantir to basically take over the management of military systems, healthcare, NHS, you name it. And other governments are not, there's almost every government across Europe to varying degrees, municipal, federal, provincial, have all been, you could trace out similar Palantir type integration programs, which China has been fighting. So China has been fighting back against this foreign agency that's been coming in. That's why they took down Jack Ma. That's why they forced the restructuring of Tencent. They forced the restructuring of Alibaba and Ant Group in order to obey the demands and needs of the nation and not be this foreign agency doing your own thing to weaken the institutions of the nation state and the civilization of China itself. And I think that they've shown what other countries could do if we were actually acting in the interests of our people. We could use those same powers that China has also used to rein them in, to put a lot of traitors in prison, of which China's put in millions, and try to get control, which there's still a fight. Don't get me wrong. It's still happening as a fight, but they've done a better job of battling it out than a lot of the other countries in the West that I'm looking at that have allowed this Stargate thing to increasingly replace functions of the elected government.
Is it about replacing religion, the UFO story? I mean, is that ultimately, at a very simplistic level? I mean, you talk about a new mythology, but is it not so much about mythology? Is it just about control and one of the only ways you're going to actually be able to prevent this new system from coming about and keeping control in the hands of the few is you have to get rid of organized religion, or not even get rid of it. You have to replace it somehow. And so, is that why you would come up with this new belief system? I mean, is that ultimately on a very simple level?
Yeah.
Is that why they've created this whole UFO story over the many decades?
I think,
or is there something more to it?
I think there's always layers of motive behind it and layers of effects behind it, but I think that's a big one for sure. And when you look at Peter Thiel's obsession with the Antichrist and his desire to just always meet with religious leaders as his primary sort of passion, this guy is not exactly what you call a role model for a model Christian. Although some elements of it he's obsessed with. Again, the eschatology he adores the eschatology of the Book of Revelation, the allegorical language of the Book of Revelation that you can use and interpret for all sorts of politically advantageous reasons. If you're somebody trying to manage new crusades, if you're trying to manage the behavior out of fear and terror of hellish, hellscapes on earth that God demands humanity experience at the end times, right? So that this is the sort of thing that has been used and abused for centuries by bad actors to get people to become more compliant, more pliant, more malleable, whether it's to acquiesce to things like the bloodbath of the Crusades, or whether it was to go along with the 30 Years' War, what that meant in the minds of a lot of the participants. They were thinking it was very end timesy, right? The 30 Years' War was a disaster for Europe and for just total. But all that to say, people thought when they were living through it that this was it. It's so bad it couldn't get worse. This is the end times. The Civil War, same thing in America in the 1860s. So part of this thing is that he got into religion through the Straussians by first being a Straussian sponsored by Irving Kristol in Stanford, who was the sponsor of his libertarian review that he oversaw from 88 to 92. Also Rene Girard, who is closely tied to Leo Strauss, as well as Carl Schmitt and a bunch of other nihilistic, liars acting on the surface like they're one thing, but having a secret doctrine for their inner, their favorite pupils, like Leo Strauss was exposed as doing. And Peter Thiel came out even celebrating his Straussian pedigree in 2004 in a series of Stanford lectures that he turned into an essay that people can read called The Straussian Moment, where he literally talks about the history of the Straussian thought even before Strauss, rooting it in the secret doctrines of Jesus and the Gnostic enemies of the early Christians, and how they promoted this idea that Jesus was a very different type of character than the one known in the public Bible, which had a secret teaching for his favorites, for the Mary Magdalene, for the John, and continued to maintain the secret doctrine of a secret teaching noble only for these special superhumans, right? These special initiated ones that he even locates. John Locke was a purveyor of this and a believer, as well as Thomas Hobbes earlier, that he puts in his essay, which is a very useful essay to read just to get into his psyche, because then he situates the Straussians, the importance of Leo Strauss's noble lie, and the need to create a surface appearance of Christianity for the dumb ones, and then an inner core teaching for the special ones, of which he, of course, thinks he's very special, as does Strauss's other students, who become the vanguard of the neoconservative takeover of the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and go on to continue to interface with Thiel as he's setting up Palantir out of the total information awareness operation of John Poindexter, the guy who was running the parallel government operations under Iran-Contra. That John Poindexter, who went to jail, got out of jail pretty quickly and was propped up, especially after 9/11, to be assigned by Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld to oversee the creation of that thing with the all-seeing eye of Horus, the Total Information Systems Awareness program, to monitor and measure everyone's behavior, to predictively act on future crimes. And that freaked out a lot of people. The title was very, very Orwellian. They had to shut down that program in its official government branch because that didn't quite pass the test case. And they basically quickly figured out a way to create a civilian front group that would do all of those things it was formerly doing under a government entity, and brought in, this is the origin story of Palantir, where Peter Thiel was brought in by Richard Curl, who introduced him to John Poindexter and introduced him to the top brass of the CIA and the FBI, who then oversaw the creation of this new civilian front organization that had as its only contractor, its only customer, the CIA for the first few years. Right? And the Palantir idea is not that different as a concept from the total information awareness of the all-seeing eye of Horus. It's just now using a Lord of the Rings trope of this orb that could see omnisciently everything, but through a glass darkly, right? And everybody should feel thus, like if they're always being watched, that they won't even commit crimes, they won't even think bad thoughts, because they will self-police in this weird panopticon type of logic that Jeremy Bentham put forth as an architecture centuries earlier. I think that's part of the orientation. So the fact that Peter Thiel is also doing that, I think it plays into the theory and the thinking behind the usefulness of, if not creating new gods, redefining what we thought our gods were, what we thought Muhammad was doing when he was flying up to heaven, or what Jesus was doing when he was getting the powers to heal the sick and walk on water and do the magic. We're being told, oh, it was actually aliens that were infusing these powers into them, that maybe they got through secret holy drugs, maybe that helped them interface with the fifth dimension and then communicate with these shadowy entities of the cosmic forces. And these were always the aliens that were there. Or maybe Jesus was an alien, right? Maybe Jesus was the alien helping to create a new revelation for, and you could go in a lot of places. So in some cases, they want to redefine the existing religions. If you can't, people are deeply connected to their religions, so it's not so easy to just destroy religions. But what they can do is rebrand it and redefine what people thought their religions were. I think also the big, this is a whole side topic, but I'll just say it. I think that Carl Jung's work in being the primary sponsor of the Nag Hammadi Gnostic texts that were discovered, and I use this in air quotes, in 1945 in Egypt, very conveniently right after World War II was over. At the same moment, right then you have the Dead Sea Scrolls conveniently found in a cave, as if nobody walked into this cave for 2,000 years, and this kid's throwing rocks. It's like, oh, biggest find that's going to shake the foundations of religion forever right after World War II. Really? Serious? But the fact that Carl Jung is the major sponsor of these things, I think these were always known and just held in secret by certain forces. And this was sort of a way to bring everybody in the world into this new initiation that had formerly been reserved for only those who had passed certain tests to know about the continuity of these secret gospels, these secret teachings. And there's basically World War II didn't work out as the basis for their New World Order. They had a Hitler agenda that was supposed to serve as the thing that was going to make the New World Order, the Age of Horus, whatever happened, but that wasn't Reich. That had to be aborted, so they needed a new plan. And I think the idea that the coming out party of the UFOs, these Nordic Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, perfect beings from Venus, who are like, that's the way that all of these early alien encounters were being sold to the world, right? Is these perfect blonde Aryan Teutonic beings from another planet that were coming down to the special people like George Adamski, or George Van Tessel from England, all theosophists, by the way, who had their own theosophical temples formerly. They're all the ones who now, after going through World War II, where they'd formerly also been kind of pro-Nazi too, like there's connections to the silver shirts, the Nazi silver shirts of William Dudley Pele, who's also a theosophical clairvoyant before he sets up his fascist silver shirts in America. And there's connections to him and George Adamski. There's connections to him to a variety of these agencies that are all been coming out right after World War II saying, hey, I'm having personal experiences with Aryan super beings from Venus, which is also morning star. Venus is the morning star, the star you see in the morning and at night. It is the foundation of the Lucifer idea, which is also what these Gnostics think is the essence of Jesus, is he is Lucifer. It's the Sethian Gospels for that reason, because Jesus is actually the serpent spirit to be wise as serpents. After all, is what Jesus said, didn't he not, for his earlies? So that's the sort of like essence of what they were trying to do. And I think that the foundations of a lot of the stories like Roswell, these terrible, these badly piloted flying circles, had less to do with what we were actually absorbing from the Nazis, who actually did have flying saucer experiments and alternative research on flying technologies that the Nazis were doing, as were the Italians, that we absorbed into our secret science program. So there was something people were seeing as far as experimental aircraft over different, test bases in UK and USA. That's certainly the case, not to disparage that. New types of drone technologies that emerged out of Area 51 and these other test facilities. They were seeing something real, but you are not supposed to think about the very human agency behind these things and how it was taken into the ongoing secret science program of America that birthed MK Ultra as one of many other secret science programs of the Manhattan Project, which didn't fully disappear, just was rebranded and expanded after World War II. And a lot of that requires storytelling to keep on giving color to what we're experiencing when we do drugs, when we see an object moving in the night sky that we can't fully account for. We need a story. And that's where the storytellers, the myth makers, are employed to fill that void, whether it's in science fiction, the followers of H.G. Wells, or in Hollywood films, or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely in Hollywood. As you were talking and explaining all of this, I was thinking with Palantir, I was thinking Minority Report. That came to mind right away. I'm even, as you're explaining the Nazi fascination with the occult, let's say, and these types of things. I'm even thinking of simple movies, fun movies like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Which is built on the Nazis going after the Lost Ark, which will decimate the armies of the West, right? And that's the whole story of that film. Then you look at the resurgence of discussion, YouTube videos, and so many things, so many people, even Hunter Biden, in his interview with Candace Owens the other day, I believe he even brought up the Gnostic Bible, the Gnostic books, and he started to quote them. I think I'm right about this. I might be wrong, but I think I'm right about this. And he brought up a quote from one of the books. Anyway, people can fact check me. They can fact check me on this. But there's definitely discussion about the Gnostic books that were found. And when you go through those books, you're 100% right. There is they portray Jesus as this extraterrestrial being. They're definitely pushing that view of Jesus as not so much of spirit of God, but as a being from a different dimension. And that's what the books, many of the books are rooted in. And so it really does turn religion, what we know as religion, just on its head.
Yeah, that caught me. Like when you read the book of Philip or the book of Thomas or the secret, the Gospels of Mary Magdalene or the secret Apocryphon of John from the Nag Hammadi, the essence, the character of Jesus is totally devoid of the type of loving humanity that I think is the only noble kind of character of the true Jesus. If we're going to have Jesus as an idea in our mind and in our heart, it has to have some human loving attributes that make us fundamentally truly human and noble and good, and focused on a love of truth and goodness, and a willingness to fight evil, to throw out the money changers, to stand up against the structures of an evil empire when that happens. And all those human attributes are completely devoid from this etheric being, this sort of like detached, aloof, etheric being that is always hinting at having secret knowledge, and is using kind of like, I think, an intentionally encoded kind of language to seduce and give promises of secret knowledge for those who are going to hold on and go through maybe a bit of pain or go through a bit of a process of initiation to discover something true. And always allusions to androgyny in so many of these different Gnostic texts. There's always this idea that God is actually not a good God. God is an evil God. God is Yaldabaoth. God is the evil demiurge that was the effect, the mutant effect of the self-procreation of the man-hating Sophia, the fallen emanation of the transcendental divine that has no morality, no good or bad, is just pure light that created these sexified emanations that procreated with each other, creating the foundations of virtue and justice and whatever else that have very little meaning in this cosmology, and out of which Sophia was generated, that just hated man so much and was so resentful that she didn't want to procreate with a male energy, but rather with herself, and gave rise to this mutant Yaldabaoth, whatever, that was so ignorant that he made the world in his own image, and the world becomes evil. The world becomes everything, the morality of what humans interface with, the physical, the spiritual domain that we were born into, that we operate within. All of that is reframed in the mind of somebody who believes this as evil, a prison planet, a prison universe that we have to break free of through, again, curated rituals that are going to help us do that by integrating light and darkness, by integrating the evil and the good, the sacred and the profane. And the more we get used to doing that, the more we're liberated from the belief in either. And the more we become self-actualized, to become creatures who do what we will as the whole of the law, and qualify in Crowley's mind as being truly men. And thus, if we qualify, then we know that it is our place as true men, who are actually superhuman, we're transhuman, to then naturally subjugate the underhumans, those who didn't go through that process and thus don't qualify for Thelema as their Ubermenschen doctrine. They're not really human. They're just things that are there to be played for, to be used as slaves for the higher elites. That's it. And I feel like there's a smell of sulfur in the remarks of some of these nouveau Christians who are coming out popularizing a different brand of Christianity than the one that I think gave rise to everything good and useful for the past 2,000 years. That does seem to be very compatible with the UFOs or aliens are demons, and Jesus was a interdimensional being type of framing. That's also become J.D. Vance is giving speeches about his idea, giving interviews about his idea of the aliens are demons. Very high level people in government are giving speeches about this sort of thing. And I'm not there to disparage that completely. I'm just saying it seems to be all part of the same witch's brew as far as I'm looking at it.
Right. right? I've noticed that as well. A lot of very, very high level people or prominent personalities are definitely creating this demon, UFO demon type of connection. Not really UFOs, but they're demons is what we're dealing with. I just fact checked my own claim with Hunter Biden in the Kansas interview. During the discussion on faith, Hunter Biden brought up the Gnostic Gospels discovered in Egypt. He specifically mentioned the Gospel of Thomas, also called the Book of Thomas in some contexts, alongside the Gospel of Philip. So interesting. Yeah. So just a final question, Matthew, where are we going with all of this? I mean, you've got the documentaries that you're working on. Once again, excellent documentaries, really fascinating stuff. A lot of history, a lot of geopolitics as well in all of your work with regards to the documentaries and the tie-in with the whole UFO narrative. Without giving away too much of your work and the documentaries that are soon to be released, the work that's soon to be released, where are we going with all of this? Where are we going with the narrative of the UFOs? What's the tie-in with AI? You talked about AI, you talked about Palantir. Yeah. Are these things converging? Is that ultimately where we're heading towards? Just your final thoughts as we wrap up the video.
So as part of the Bad Witches brew, there's an idea to converge in the psychedelic new holy, instead of having just a little wafer host and a bit of wine as part of your religious service, part of the new rites involve in the mind of those who are trying to like manage this kind of weird eschatological manipulation. They want us to see drugs as being a holy thing, as part of the psilocybin DMT normalization program that's been underway in the psyche now for a number of years. Jordan Peterson's a big promoter of this thing. There's others that are becoming increasingly government policy that Trump unfortunately has embraced and facilitated. It starts kind of like made starts, it's like sympathetically, I understand for people who have trauma, who've been through crazy abuse, or maybe have suicidal thoughts with impossible neuro pathways. Maybe it helps to depattern and to help if for extreme cases, maybe. Okay, sure. But it's this policy is not designed to just help those who are in extreme situations of normalizing therapeutic psychedelics. It's once they're always animated by the idea of getting into an Aldous Huxley kind of Brave New World structure, where that becomes our new freedom, is the freedom to have our mind drugs and to have. We see it even being sold for microaggressions, right? Everyone's being told that they are all victims. We're all victims of microaggressions on a subconscious level, and the only way to thus cope with these subconscious problems of anxiety and nihilism and other things we have is to receive microdoses to help. So there's already an effort to get people into that state that they're going to expand. It's the Soma religion. So the more you dislodge people from their idea of an objective universe outside of themselves, because in that world you are more convinced that you create your own reality. Every perception you have is objectively real. Every feeling you have is objectively real. Every hallucination you have is objectively real. And people could be induced to have similar hallucinations if they're given similar stories that they feel very religiously strongly about, that will start coloring, like, let's say, certain back rooms, right, that are being infused into the zeitgeist, where people are all talking about having the same dream, and it becomes a feedback loop, right? The more people want it, the more they think it, the more they imagine it, the more that it colors their dreams, the more they think that maybe there is this objective other dark universe that is infusing itself into our collective psyche that's interfacing with us. And that's how a lot of this stuff works. So it does play into the this new UFO religion that they want to, they'll allow people to have disputes about like which kind of alien you want to side with, who are the good aliens, who are the bad aliens, or so they were going to allow some dispute of, is it the David Icke kind or the Stephen Greer kind that you support? And they'll let Stephen Greer and Icke fight each other while ignoring the fact that both of them are committed to overthrowing Christianity and creating a new Gnostic kind of religious architecture to what Christianity should be allowed to be. So yeah, you got this bad idea. I think on the good side of things, we do see evidence of a battle going on. Especially, I see more evidence of this in China and Russia, I'm hoping that there are patriots. I mean, there's clearly a lot of patriots in America who don't want to go along with everything I just said. They just don't know how to think about it necessarily, but they would like to revive their better constitutional traditions and work with Putin, work with Xi Jinping to collaborate in breaking humanity free of this ancient evil that's been latched on like a parasite. I'm hoping that movement can get its head out of its ass a little bit and start seeing more critically some of the traps that have been set for them. And that includes, let's presume that Trump means well and he's just being advised poorly. I'm hoping that he can also tap into some of the better things he was doing in the first term as far as his instincts to get real genuine war avoidance and collaboration with China and Russia and others, and not allow the Peter Thiels and the transhumanists of the Stargate variety to run policy for the world, or especially for the transatlantic. So we'll see. But I don't know. It's an underdefined transition moment, right, between two systems, and there's a big battle, knives out, over what that new system is going to be. And I think we should be looking more seriously, honestly, at how Xi Jinping and the patriots of China have actually been doing battle with this thing and taking some lessons, seriously taking notes. Because so far they're just that's why China's been so demonized, so that we don't even look at what the battle is against the deep state structures inside of China. Because we could learn a hell of a lot, or look at what we did in the better times past when we probably had like Franklin Roosevelt doing battle with this agency inside of America and doing it very, very successfully in a way that we could also learn from in the West as well. So I mean, with that, I just realized I'm 8 minutes late for another.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up there. We went for a good hour. Thank you, Matthew. But before you go, real quick, once again, where can people follow your work?
Yeah, then go to CanadianPatriot.org to watch all of the documentaries. My wife, Cynthia Chung, her Substack also has a lot of great material being produced at cynthiachung.substack. And my Substack is matthewehret.substack.com. And our books are there too, so people who like doing more heavy lifting. We've written a lot of books going through a lot of these different dynamics. So those are all easy to find on those websites.
All the links in the description box down below, including the link for the documentary series. Thank you, Matthew. Take care.
Thank you.